Welcome back. It's time for the second part of tonight's France 24 debate devoted to the twin investigations currently targeting FIFA, the world governing body of football. We were discussing a moment ago where the American investigation, we're going to move on to the Swiss one in just a moment, leaves Sepp Blatter, who the president of FIFA, rather controversial president of FIFA, who's seeking a fifth term at the helm of the organization on Friday. I'd like to bring in Omar Al-Raisi, who's a sports journalist and columnist at The National, also part of the staff of the U17 UAE World Cup and local organising committee. Thank you for being with us today. We ended the first part of the debate on the question of Sepp Blatter and looking ahead. Do you believe that he should now resign?
Well, depending on all the what is happening and what has been happening for all these years, if it was a corporate company rather than if it wasn't, let's say Blatter wasn't working in FIFA and all this was happening, like the bribery cases and the charges and the arrests, it is up to the CEO or the chairman, in this case, Sepp Blatter, to control all that. So he should have been sacked or resigned from the company. But now we're talking about FIFA, which is like a little government in itself. So it is really a big question to really say whether he should resign. Because as of now, there is no any really crime or any charge against Sepp Blatter, but against his right-hand people or his allies at the FIFA. So it's really difficult to answer this question if he should resign or to stay ruling.
Stefan Szymanski, of course, one of the charges that's leveled at Sepp Blatter at the moment is that he oversaw this system where allegedly this corruption went on, repeating over and over again that it was something that FIFA could deal with internally and that no one from the outside needed to get involved. If for no other reason than that, surely he's responsible for what's gone on.
Oh, yeah, I think there's no real question amongst anybody who seriously thinks about that Blatter is not responsible for the whole thing from the top. And his predecessor, João Havelange, also was really led the coordination and structure of FIFA and created this system whereby there's this web of network of individuals who are ultimately dependent on the president of FIFA, and there are money flows and money transfers, and there's been evidence brought up for years and years and years about this. I don't think there's any real question about it. The real question is, how is FIFA going to react to this? Because FIFA is a self-governing organization, and as I just said, they created the people at the top created a network of members dependent upon them. So can they really turn their back on the guy who put them in their place? And as many people say, one reason why Blatter has remained at the top for so long is he knows a lot about all of the members of the organization, and if he goes, then there's potentially a lot of other information likely to leak out, which would be very damaging throughout the entirety of FIFA.
Now, which brings us on rather nicely, Brian Schneider, to the questioning of that self-governing sort of structure of FIFA. The Swiss, of course, have launched their investigation, which should allow some degree of transparency to be brought to this organization. The reason Sepp Blatter, as we were just hearing, has the power he has is that it is a structure unlike any other. It is for an organization of its size, of its wealth, run in a remarkably untransparent way.
Well, as Omar said, this is a non-profit organization, so they're not subject to other normal business laws. Vincent made this point a little bit as well, that we need a lot of reform in how these big types of federations that govern world sport across all of sport are. But for Sepp Blatter, we have to remember loyalty is a one-way street. We've actually been here before. He has essentially sold out his top lieutenants in times of crisis before, basically to save himself. He did it in 2002 when the FIFA Secretary General, Michel van Roofenen, tried to get a whole bunch of documents out in public, a lot of financial documents to show the corruption, in the hopes that Sepp Blatter would lose the 2002 election. Of course, Blatter still had a lot of support all around the world. Everyone keeps saying Africa and Oceania, but Blatter has support all around the world, and people that have essentially profited both legally and illegally over the years from him, and they're going to keep doing that. He survived another crisis in 2011 by essentially selling out Mohammed bin Hammam in order to keep power then. And Mohammed bin Hammam had done a lot of work for Sepp Blatter all the way back to the 80s and 90s. So it becomes, we know Sepp Blatter will, if it comes down to it, sell out basically anybody. As you alluded to, will the other people around him form some type of coalition while they kind of turn the tables on him? Because they've seen what he's done to top lieutenants in the past.
I wonder whether, if the question then is, of course, about the presidency of FIFA, it is also about the structure of FIFA. Is this an organization, do you believe, that has the ability, never mind the will for now, but the ability to fix itself?
This type of organization, the FIFA, know that they have to work on the transparency. They know they have to reform themselves. Of course, there are some affairs in the past. Of course, we know some affairs around the Blatter. At the end of the day, I think in this affair, we will have some facts, we will have some information. But I think the most important thing in this affair for me is that show us that the organization of sports, it's end of a system, because when you have a system with election, when you know each electors, each people who will vote, you can discuss with them. This system was, I think, 1 century before. At one time that you can't meet each other.
In a totally different world.
Yeah. That means nowadays you can meet each decision makers 10, 20 times per year. You can send him an email, you can call him every day, so you can influence him. So we can talk about influence, we can talk about lobbying, and sometimes we can talk about corruption. Whatever FIFA, we can talk about other sports, you can talk about Blatter, you can talk about other people. We have to reform this organization, this type of organization. I think is the most important thing, more than Blatter situation.
The investigation, of course, Omar Al-Raisi, that's being launched by the Swiss will focus particularly on the 2018 World Cup being held in Russia and the 2022 World Cup being held in Qatar. Do you foresee that as a result of this closer examination of the way the bidding process were carried out, that either of those two decisions could be called into question?
I think they're already calling it into question, but FIFA just a couple of hours ago in the press conference released a statement as well that the voting won't be redone. There won't be a re-vote, but there is a possibility that the voting might be re-evaluated. That is possible. I mean, within the AFC and Africa, I mean, as we know, Mr. Blatter holds a lot of influence. Even within the Arab nations and the Arab football confederations and associations, they are more supporting towards Sepp Blatter rather than the Prince Ali of Jordan, who is the only candidate left to fight him in the elections, which is this Friday. So we don't know if the elections are going to go ahead or no. But I think unless Blatter is gone, they fire him, or if he's arrested or whatever happens with him, then there might be a possibility of a vote for 2018-22. But if he stays and if he gets re-elected on Friday, then I don't see it really happening.
Stefan Szymanski, of course, the question of the giving of the World Cup to Russia, but mainly to Qatar, was considered sufficiently controversial and raised so many questions that it was really at the heart of both investigations.
Well, yes, I think that's true. Although, again, the indictment is very clear that to claim that there's a web of corruption that stretches back to the 1980s. And that's certainly in line with a lot of books and articles that have been written over the last 2 decades. I think, again, but part of the problem is going to be to disentangle the clearly corrupt in FIFA from the merely undesirable or just not quite clean, but certainly not blatantly corrupt. So, for example, the Russian bid is going to come under question. The issue of having a World Cup in Russia is going to be looked at. There was an investigation, and there was no evidence brought up against Russia, which would have been able to stick in a court of law. And already the Russians have said that the American action is undesirable, and they shouldn't have done this. So I think one of the threats here is that the whole of FIFA could unravel, and we could end up in a kind of the sort of situation we had in the 70s and 80s with factions and boycotts and so on. And so I think this is a very risky time for world football as a whole.
It is, of course, going to be very interesting to see as FIFA unravels, and it's almost certain that it's going to get messier before it gets tidier over the coming days and weeks. Brian Schneider, we're just hearing within the last few minutes, the UEFA have asked for the postponement of the election that's planned for Friday. I suppose the question is whether the confederations that operate within FIFA have sufficient power to drive the organization, even as it begins to unravel, and force it to make the kinds of changes that it really now needs to make.
The short answer is no, probably not. FIFA is the one feeding them all of the money. Everyone talks about development money in football, whether it's used, like I said before, legally or illegally, whether there's kickbacks on legitimate projects. But unless the bigger players in some of these confederations, like the United States and Mexico in CONCACAF, or say England, France, Germany here in UEFA, they would like to drive this change, but they're often undercut by a lot of these smaller countries, and some of them aren't even countries. Like even Montserrat is not even actually a country, but it's a country for FIFA purposes, and they get just as much money as the United States or anyone. So they don't really want to see the system change. There's a lot of federation presidents today that are really upset with the FBI and the Americans. They're not changing their vote. Sepp Blatter's going to win the vote, whether they postpone it or not.
The problem is, of course, even as one asks the question, how can this have gone on for so long without it being addressed? The answer is that there are so many vested interests that are very strong, vested interests that do not want to see feathers ruffled or things changed, and who are going to fight tooth and nail for this not to go too far.
There is too many interests for many stakeholders at the end of the day. Of course, there is the law, and we are not comfortable with some acts. But at the end of the day, there is many people who have some positive interests to keep a statu quo. And it's really difficult to imagine how we can change it. Maybe this type of affairs, that mean when we move from sport laws to general laws or civil laws, it can be a chance to an opportunity to change things, like it was done in doping affairs in France 20 years ago. It can be this type of opportunity, and I think we can try to use it to start the move.
Some kind of change. Omar Al-Raisi, I suppose, listening to that, one is struck by the fact that, of course, the biggest interest not represented in all this, and perhaps the greatest scandal of all, is that for ordinary football fans, this has been a complete betrayal of their trust, of a sport that matters to so many people in so many parts of the world. And they simply have no voice, it seems, at the heart of the organization that represents world football.
Absolutely. I mean, I was on Twitter the whole day, and I've been reading tweets, and I was just reading almost everybody, like at least 99.9% of them are really devastated, and all of them want Mr. Blatter out. I mean, an hour ago, maybe, I read a poll conducted around the world, and most of the countries, including Qatar, the fans, basically, they didn't want Mr. Blatter to continue. Even though the World Cup is going to be held in 2022 in Qatar, they don't really want Mr. Blatter to continue. But again, everybody thinks that it was Mr. Blatter's idea to get the World Cup to Qatar, but it wasn't. He actually voted for Australia. And a lot of the fans around the world don't know that. Qatar voted for Australia. He never voted for Qatar to host 2022. But again, even that, and the fans are really devastated. They think everything happened under his watch, even though he didn't do anything wrong, which can be debatable. But again, everything was under his watch. He should have had a more tighter control of FIFA, or he should have really sacked the people who were just arrested this morning. So really the fans, football is about the fans, and they're really devastated all around the world.
Louis Zaha, I hope you're still with us. I wanted to put to you, we were discussing what could be done or what stakeholders had the power, sadly not the football fans apparently, as we've been hearing, but what stakeholders in this huge business, in this huge organisation, had the power to force it to change despite itself. We've talked a little bit about the various confederations within FIFA. What about the sponsors? Do they not have the power to force FIFA to change?
Yeah, I think so. They have like a huge impact because they put so many thousand millions to the sponsorship. So like Coca-Cola, if I name one, I think they have the power to make sure that they put enough pressure for the change. And there is now so many people, not only fans but players and managers, who really wants to see that in their living life. They want to see some transparent ways and transparent platform who can really help the organization like FIFA or UEFA to run smoothly, because there is so many players who can be role models, and I think that it is not the way to do that inside I would say a crisis with every day or every month some corruption debate or so many stuff that we don't want to hear about it. So yes, definitely there is like a union can be done with the sponsors, with managers, with players or former players who can be invited to FIFA debates and try to help and try to really create a new atmosphere of work, because now it's paranoia. Everyone is scared because he seems to be alongside someone who is being bribed in any case. So this is not the way to do it, and that's why I created my company. It's just to obviously give a solution, and Axistar is there for that.
Stefan Szymanski, I suppose one of the questions that one can't help but ask tonight is, why have people like the sponsors not acted before? Why have the football fans not rebelled before? Why have the confederations not made more noise before? How has this been allowed? Of course, with the investigations are just being launched and there's much more to come out. But these suspicions have been around for a long time. Why were they not investigated a long time ago?
Well, I'd like to challenge a comment that was made just a minute ago, saying that the fans are outraged and the fans want things to change. There are many fans who are outraged and dislike FIFA and the way it's run, but actually I think a very large fraction of fans don't care. As long as the World Cup goes on as ever, that's good enough for them. I think the other thing you have to remember is that amongst all of the corruption, FIFA has also done a lot of good over the last 30 years, whilst in the hands of these people. So one of the biggest things that FIFA has done is to redistribute money from the main sources, the main regions that generate revenue, which is actually Europe, to the other regions, notably Asia and especially Africa, which has benefited from a huge diversion of funds towards it, and the development of football on that continent, which has been extraordinary by any standards in the last 20, 30 years, judging by look at the number of star players in European teams that come from Africa. So I think part of the problem is, and part of the reason this is going to be very problematic going forward, is that it's hard to disentangle the good things that FIFA have done from the bad things, and it's hard to separate the good guys from the bad guys. And as is often the case, most of the people here have been up to bad things, but they've also been up to good things, and this just becomes a very political issue, I think.
It becomes very political, Brian Schneider, difficult to disentangle. Of course, the media are going to be watching it every step of the way. We're talking about shady deals done on the quiet that are going to be very difficult to prove or disprove. We're talking about investigations launched by two different countries, which, as you were suggesting before, are going to need to feed off each other and yet are going to have trouble working out what the parameters of each needs to be.
This is going to be a bit of a slow burn in terms of the investigations. There's a lot of different branches and arms that the U.S. can go based on the people they have already in South America and Central America that will start feeding around to the rest of the world. And again, anything as far as going after the very top level of FIFA and Sepp Blatter, that will be a very slow legal process by the Swiss Attorney General. I wanted to add one point just about the fans and sponsors real quick, because I actually think that's a bit of a misnomer. Everyone thinks like this is the responsibility of the sponsors, and I get that they have some responsibility here, but at some level,
Well, some power at least.
a little bit, but it's kind of an exercise of projection from the fans. The fans, oh, we are powerless, we can't do anything, when actually there's one thing a fan can do, and that is not watch the World Cup. But the problem is nobody's willing to do that. This is the most popular sporting event in the world. You could say maybe the Summer Olympics, but I think the World Cup has the Summer Olympics beat. So in fans, you know, they want to say they don't have any power, but as long as they keep watching the World Cup and it remains so popular, sponsors are going to buy in.
It was the same type of issue when we talk about the World Cup in Brazil. There were some strikes, but when the World Cup was done, that's it. Everybody talk about games, everybody talk about football, and nobody talk about anymore about strike.
Louis Sahar, that is one of the reasons this has gone on for so long, and it answers my question of earlier, how could it go on for so long, is simply that the fans love the sport, most popular sport in the world, and as long as that was the case, no one was going to switch off their television during the World Cup, and in a sense, the way FIFA ran its internal affairs didn't really worry terribly many people very much.
That's true. It's a fair point. You know, I think unless it's done in a different way, no one will turn off his TV because we are addicted to it. You know, basically we want to have games every weekend. There is no one day in a week that you have no football games on TV. So it is really demanding to fans to say no, we don't want to watch the best competition on earth. It is really unreal to imagine something like this. But I think at some point the FIFA or whoever who is going to turn to be a president or have like the power to make decisions will have to really restore the institution, because this is an institution. They have the power to change many things in a society. You know, many people think that it's only a sport. Every sportsman got that power in him. And that's what we should be trying to help those people to be capable of changing things in our society. And this is not the way of giving the right example. You know, when we're talking about those stuff on TV, kids are watching that, and this is wrong. So this is now the turning point for FIFA, because he knows that they have like a big job in their hands in the next coming months.
And they know they're being closely watched. In the last few seconds, FIFA has announced that it is provisionally, temporarily suspending 11 people, including Jeffrey Webb, of course, the organization's vice president, among those who were arrested today and are still being held in Zurich. A quick